Every day, we're seeing young Americans from across the country get more politically activated. On both sides of the aisle, young Americans are standing up for what they believe in. Not just by their words, but they are truly organizing. My next guest started her own nonprofit at the age of 22 with the goal to educate young people on what she believes are the perils that follow socialism. Morgan Zegers travels the country in hope to inspire the next generation to be more engaged and to stand up for what they believe in. So let's dive a little further and see why Morgan is a real American game changer. So Morgan, welcome to American Game Changers.
Oh, thank you so much. I love the name.
Yeah, thank you. We just picked it out.
I feel unworthy of being called the game changer, though.
No,
but
I think
cool.
you are,
It works
for
for me.
sure. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So happy for you to be here. Tell me a little bit about your organization and how you got it started.
Yeah, so I run a nonprofit called Young Americans Against Socialism. And we got our start by interviewing survivors, immigrants from socialist and communist countries. And I did it because I was just always talking to young people my age that were saying some crazy stuff. And I had a feeling that if they heard the realities of what happens when you adopt leftist policies, they would have their minds changed at least just a little bit, or at least just the tip of the spear to cause them to want to change their mind or look more into it. Hearing the stories are very emotional and powerful, and the left is usually the side that monopolizes emotion. But when you hear facts and emotion combined, and that's what's found in stories from survivors from these countries, it's quite a powerful thing. And so I had a job in advertising in Boston. And what we would do is we would take private companies' marketing campaigns or ideas, and we would make marketing campaigns for them for specific audiences. And at the same time as I was doing my 9 to 5 for that, I would go home every night and plan out this idea for a nonprofit that we would fundraise and ask for help to pay for the production of educational videos with the survivors. But then in the same way that I was doing it at my 9 to 5, we would create these targeted campaigns that would tell the stories and reach young minds, because right now 70% or so of young Americans would choose a socialist leader over a capitalist one if they were given the option. And I find that disgusting. So it's been a great passion of mine ever since, and now we're expanding. We have a new initiative called the Freedom Guide, which is more about the hows to how to actually live out your values rooted in freedom. Like, once you're aware of the fact that freedom is really important and socialism is really bad, we have to reject leftist policies. The Freedom Guide is now showing people how they can actually live out their values and make sure they're having a positive impact. So I really love it, and I'm just thankful for the work that I get to do.
Wow, that's amazing. So one thing I've noticed, especially in the last 5 years or so, is maybe even longer, is that young people on both right and left have really started getting more activated, starting to be more activists in general for young people. Why do you think young people have become more activist on both left and right?
Oh, well, so I would say the first layer of activism that we saw for our generation, the first round of it, we could say, was against Trump, obviously. And unfortunately, it's just because we are so indoctrinated through the public school system, through pop culture, through Hollywood, and the propaganda pushed by the mainstream media. It's all in favor of the leftist state. That's how I see it. And our generation, we didn't get the proper education on history, on economics, on philosophy, civics in the public education system. And our parents and the generations before us have been so dangerously complacent that now millennials and Gen Z lack a basic understanding of how our society works, how we got to this great point, and what we should be thankful for. So I believe it's this lack of understanding of comparative history that makes it easy for us to look at something like President Trump's administration, even though it was very successful and it got so much success for us as the average Americans out here. And we can look at it and say, so he's a Nazi, and just think that that's so horrible and that we have concentration camps at the border, when in reality, communist China exists in our real world and they have actual concentration camps. So when we dilute these kind of words the way the left has over the last decade, especially with woke politics, it's hard for us to understand how lucky we are here and how serious the situations worldwide are. And so that's why I see so many people our age that are well-intentioned. They're falling for the lies of the left. And that led to the first round of activism. But I would say now we're seeing this new wave, and it's activism and engaging in American politics by our generation, because we are finally experiencing force for the first time. People look at the numbers of like, oh, a majority of young Americans want socialism over capitalism. And we can often say it's because we've never lived in a socialist or communist country. We've never experienced that threat before. Uh-oh. COVID came, and now we're in full-blown authoritarianism. I mean, the Joe Biden administration just said, reject what the judicial branch is saying, reject what the courts are saying, and listen to me and listen to our mandates from the executive branch. That is unprecedented in American history. It's a rejection of the Constitution. It's a rejection of the basic principles of checks and balances. And I think a lot of people our age were finally experiencing, wait, we can be told what to do? Like, there's a world where we don't have choice. This is force, not choice anymore. It's now authoritarianism and tyranny. And that's leading to us saying, oh my gosh, there's something to stand up for. And this is an exciting time for Americans, I would say. We're at the brink of it, and we could go one way or we could go the other. And I hope we go a certain way. I'm sure you know which way I'm talking about, but I think this is a pivotal point for us.
From my understanding is, when I was in college, graduated 2015, the left and even the right, it wasn't so organized, it wasn't so at each other's throats. Why do you think it's so many, especially on the left, how did they get so organized, and why are they, in essence, what do they want?
Oh, gosh. Well, they want communism in America. I run a group called Young Americans Against Socialism. For me, that's because I've always had this passion for independence, and I believe independence comes first from economic and financial independence. Socialism is just the economic step of communism. There's also totalitarianism, which is basically thought control, the elimination of any opposing political thought. And we see that with cancel culture today. I mean, look at Aaron Rodgers, what they're doing to them. Look at anybody who dares to speak out, any Hollywood actress, any politician that dares to commit wrongthink. You are now ostracized and removed from your public square, removed from your position of power. That's totalitarianism, and it's one of the steps to communism. The other is authoritarianism, and that's what I mentioned earlier with this idea of force versus choice. It's when the government tells you what to do, not just protects your rights, but tells you what you're now going to do. So socialism is just the economic step, and it's the government taking over the major industries and businesses in the economy. And that's really dangerous, Nick, because it leads to a reliance, a dependence. Once you're dependent, once you're reliant on something, you are no longer free, because if they don't give that thing to you, you're put in a position where you say, okay, so am I going to comply with their force, or am I going to be able to detach and say, I don't need you, I can live my own life? And so for me, because I believe in economic independence, I wanted to interview the survivors that were dependent on the state, that did rely on the government. When we look at Venezuela, the PR offices there, or the HR offices, do you know what the HR offices in countries like that do? They don't take in sexual harassment claims like they do here in America. The HR offices monitor people on if they are complying with the state's desires. And what they say is, listen, we provide you your pension, we provide you your employment, we provide you your food, your health care, every basic service that you need, your housing. And if you do not do what we ask you to do, we're going to monitor it. We're going to monitor if you go to our rallies, if you show up to vote for certain places, if you wear red when we want you to wear red in favor of communism, if you have a picture of Che Guevara in your office, and we are going to strip you away of what you need to survive unless you start complying with us. It's a very dangerous position. And I really see it as, we are in a point in America right now where we're fully blown way beyond this whole issue of just the rising threat of socialism. I believe the college campuses these days, they're little breeding grounds for totalitarianism. They're little breeding grounds for what happens on these campuses. They graduate and they don't lose their values. They don't become less radical. They go out and they spread it to society. And that's why we see it in the bureaucracy today. It's why we see it in our government. It's why we see it in the major corporations. These kids are growing up radical, and then they are graduating radical, and then they are bringing it into the real world. And it's very dangerous.
So do you think that there's any peace with people that want to declare themselves socialists in this country? Do you think that we can't find any pathway? I mean, I might be asking the wrong person, your whole organization. But
no, I agree.
I try to find a way in which we can live in this country and coincide. Is that possible?
For me, I always think back. I had this one roommate in college, and when I first met her, she had a poster of Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, Karl Marx, and Fidel Castro on her wall. They had party hats on. They had these fruity cocktail umbrella drinks in their hands, these mass murderers and dictators. And it said, welcome to the party. And she said, oh, I'm a communist. And she said, my principles and these guys, we are going to bring empowerment back to the working class. We're going to uplift the working class of America. We're going to bring progress, all these things, this jargon. And there's no getting to her. I will tell you right now, she follows me on Instagram still. She's very kind. She's very sweet. But she has mass murderers and dictators on her wall. And I don't think I'm ever going to change her mind. I'm not going to try to. But I know there's a lot of people out there who aren't like that who don't have mass murderers and dictators on their wall, but they do see this crisis in the healthcare system. They do see the rising cost of college and this massive student loan debt crisis caused by government intervention. And they do see people struggling out there and they want to help. And so my frustration when we talk about actually moving forward comes from the conservatives, from the Republicans and the people on the right that I don't think are deeply rooted in their convictions once they get into office. And they are bad at communicating that we care about the issues young people care about and that we have solutions for them. Because right now, I think our generation looks and they only see solutions coming from the left. And it's a real shame. And so I'm trying my best. I'm sure you see this too and get frustrated of like, how come we work so hard every 2 years to get these people into office? I've door knocked so much, my little feet hurt. And my soles of the shoes have worn out trying to get these people into office. And then what do? They disappoint us. And so I think the last 3 decades or so of conservative leadership in DC has been deeply disappointing. They've added to the national debt as well. They've completely abandoned what it means to have limited government at the federal level. And I hope that we can see a resurgence of embracing those principles. I think COVID's going to be the thing to do it, this rise of tyranny. So I see so many problems wrong with this. It's not just that the left is crazy and lying to our generation. It's that the right has been failing to provide proper solutions or even just to communicate that we care and have solutions in mind.
Yeah. So tell me, can we kind of skip this a little bit, but tell me, so we have these issues, we're seeing this stuff, you've noticed it. Tell me about your organization and what exactly you're doing with your organization to combat or to what you think, needs to be fixed.
Well, so like I said, I was in advertising and we would, in my job, create specific marketed campaigns to try and influence people's thought. I mean, at the time I was working for a grass seed company and a reality TV show. They were my clients. And so like we wanted to get people to watch the show or we wanted to get people to buy seed in the spring. It's like, it's not very fulfilling work. And so I was seeing the rise of the squad. AOC had just been elected and the squad became a thing. Democratic socialism got normalized. And I'm looking at all of this like, what? I was just really shocked. And so that's why I wanted to make these media campaigns that would influence the thought and inspire people to look more into the issues. And that's what we did. I did a lot of research because I like to be efficient. Okay, I'm a conservative. I don't like to waste money. I don't like to waste time. I'm very efficient with how I spend resources. And I found this study from Michigan State University that said the most effective way to reach a young person with an opposing viewpoint or with just a hard to understand topic that really matters not only for themselves, but for the world around them, it's actually hearing it via peer, not via parent or professor. And so I was like, wow, okay, peer-to-peer communication, they deemed it peer rationale. And so I was like, we could take this into the fight against socialism, into the fight of understanding leftism, because if you think about it, what a more convoluted issue to deal with than that. I mean, is there a harder issue to understand than socialism when you have all these different definitions, all these sides claiming that Nordic Europe is socialist or Venezuela is socialist, whatever. It's hard to understand and it's confusing. And so I said, well, one way we could bring peer rationale into this is interviewing the survivors. And so we would interview them, and the interviews do really well. We do like 5-minute ones, or we do a full podcast episode. We have a weekly podcast. Wow. Called Survivors of Socialism. And that's like a full 1-hour conversation. I mean, last week we interviewed this woman who escaped the Chinese labor camps and does all these stories on, she was forced to squat for 15 hours when she's first brought there. She tells about how the American companies that have their products made there in the labor camps, basically you're either tortured in the day or you're brought to a labor camp to work for the day. And the quotas are so strict and the people are so scared to not meet the quotas that the women will be like sewing something or making a product that's going to be sold with an American company. They will walk with the product in their hands, working to the bathroom, take it into the stall, go to the bathroom, not even wash their hands, and just leave again because they have that much of a strict quota that they're scared to not meet. And so that's the kind of story you're going to hear if you listen to the podcast. And we're trying to really show people just how brutal this is and how lucky we are to be Americans. The next initiative that we have is this concept of the Freedom Guide. And that's going to be our second podcast that launched this week, actually. And that's a whole new initiative. So we have an Instagram at the Freedom Guide. And that's going to be all of the house explaining the actual action items that you need. It's solutions oriented. And it's going to be to help people live out the lifestyle of freedom. So we're really excited.
That's amazing. I love that. That's going to be really cool.
Thanks.
Last question.
Okay.
What do you hope for the future? So your organization is doing a lot of good stuff now, new initiatives. And what do you hope for the future? What do you think is going to be everything if I were to come back to you in 30, 40 years? what's happening?
I get this a lot because I'm a young woman, and so I do a lot of like talks with young ladies and crowds and stuff like that. And they'll ask, do you want to get married early and then risk not reaching your career goals, or do you want to, wait and then get your career goals done and then get married and have a family, all that stuff? And I'm like, guys, I don't have career goals. I just have life goals, and I have a vision for myself to live intentionally. And I hope more Americans can take on that mentality that we have to be active in our pursuits to constantly preserve the principles of this country. So I don't see it as, I have my career and I have my job and I make my money, but then I have my life and I have my separate things. This is my life, to live a life of intention and a life of spreading this mission. I really do. I get so frustrated by people that have our values and they are maybe more conservative or they just believe in freedom, and they tell me, oh, but Morgan, I just want to be left alone. I don't want to do politics. I don't do politics, all this stuff. I did a speech with Mike Pompeo, who spoke right after me at the Steamboat Institute a couple months ago. Time flies. and he said something of like, I heard somebody tell me I don't do politics one time, and I said, well, politics does you. I was like, whew. Well, it's perfectly put. And so I have a lot of people that say, I don't do politics. But I think it's time for us to say, no, we can't be dangerously complacent anymore. We have to do politics in a way that preserves our ability to be left alone. That's what it really means for us to do politics. And so I want to encourage people to rethink what that means for them to be involved. That means rethinking education, rethinking community, and rethinking leadership, and in general, rethinking what that looks like for you and in your own life. So that's why I'm really excited for the next decades to come, because I do think, I'm sorry to be a Debbie Downer or whatever, but this is going to be decades and decades long to restructure the United States in a way that we can preserve the Constitution moving forward. We're at a pivotal point. And I think the more I can do to contribute to this, the more I can raise people's interests and pique their ears a little bit so that they start to pay more attention, because we have too many people that are on the sidelines right now. That's what my mission is. I kind of want to close off, just if this is the last question. I love the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the debate on should we ratify or not, because a lot of people are talking about like national divorce. They want to split into 4 sections, or they want to just have states pop off and not be in the union anymore, all this stuff. Our founders already went through this debate. Should we be separate states? Should we be 3 or 4 big confederacies? Probably not if you look at human history. That's why we are this union. That's why we have to preserve it, because it's so fragile and so exceptional. And Charles Kessler writes a great introduction to the Federalist Papers. And he says, basically, the Constitution is a document worthy of rational and enduring consent from an enlightened public. What I think we have right now is a completely unenlightened public, and that is why we cannot consent. It's why we do not consent to the principles of the Constitution. It's why we are going through this right now. And so if I think of what I would love America to do over the next few decades and what my mission will be in this nonprofit, whether that's for the survivors aspect or for the Freedom Guide, it is to make sure that we try and make an enlightened public once again, because then we can consent to the principles of the Constitution. What I'm really, really hoping to see is more state power rise up. We shrink the size of the federal government. We put more people in Congress that believe in getting rid of these big bills that just hand over money and power and decision-making to the executive branch and the bureaucracy. And we make sure that states are now more detached financially, because there's too many financial reliances between states and the federal government. So focusing on state power, local power, community power, and individuals bettering themselves mentally, physically, spiritually, and morally, I think we're going to be in a better place as a country. And that's really my 50-year goal, if I could put a name on it.
Well, I love that, and that's kind of why really I wanted to have you on, is I think it's so interesting to see so many young people standing up, getting more energized, more activated about these issues. But then it's also, how do we be energized, activated, but also figure out a way to come together? And figuring out where you're coming from, to me, is just super interesting. So
yeah, I mean, for years, for centuries, we've been on the same base, and I think it's just time to remind people that, and remember that there's some extremists out there and they're trying to trick us, but we're not going to fall for it. We're going to come back together and fix this. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for coming on American Game Changers. Super excited, and super excited to see what you have going on in the future.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.